welcome back to Arx Fatalis with me, Tobias. Now, we're going to be doing a lot of reading today, so if you're looking for a more fast-paced video, then you might want to give this one a miss. But if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about the backstory of this world, then stay tuned. Now, I am aware that my microphone is not the greatest, and I'm no sound engineer, but I am trying to resolve the issues that I've had with the hissing noise, etc. So we'll just see how it goes, I suppose. Right, I've turned off the sound so that we're not interrupted by any snake hissing or whatever that lady over there is doing. Sorry, this book is called The Order of Eternium by Ethan Durskew. Very little is known about the Sisters of Eternium. Even the origins of these creatures, half woman, half snake, is not known to us. In some places, their skin is covered in scales. Are they some kind of race that dates from ancient times? Or are they simply women who are victims of some form of mutation? Nobody but they could reveal the answer to this mystery. They seem to worship a snake god, but we know nothing about this god, and all the secrets about his cult are jealously guarded by the Sisterhood. We imagine that this god gave them their magic powers, but as with all the other information we have about the Order, we cannot be sure. Certain legends claim that it is the worship of this god that is responsible not only for their magic powers, but also for their transformation into snakes. There is, however, no proof for this. Since Arx's sun went into decline, the members of the Sisterhood have been the greatest allies humans have ever had. When our race first had to begin to make a life underground, the Sisters offered their magic gifts to the king to bring to life a new variety of plant that could grow without the light of the sun's rays, so that humans and their livestock might find nourishment. The population of Arx has a great deal of respect for the Sisters of the Order of Eternium, and will be eternally grateful to them for what they have done. Okay, the next book is The Guild of Travellers by the sage Dormal. The Guild of Travellers was the first institution created after the death of Arx's son. Its origins stem from a handful of die-hard survivors who did not want to join the rest of the population underground. These rare survivors developed techniques for resisting the cold by ingesting alchemist's drugs. They built their own shelters from ice and bred dogs which were also able to resist the cold. They were joined by other men and women who were not afraid of the cold, and who also wanted to venture out to other cities. Out of these journeys was born the Guild of Travellers, which is now the only remaining means of communication between the underground cities. They are always well respected and eagerly welcomed, for they are the only people able to bring news from outside. Very interesting. So, next up we have The History of Arx by Mao Kazmadian. In ancient times, 5 human tribes inhabited the largest continent in our world. These tribes were always at war, and the more structured they became, the worse it got. After years of war and a build-up of hatred, a man by the name of Poxelis came and succeeded in uniting these different groups. He became the first king of the humans. After the Battle of the Shattered Shields in the year 170, Arx enjoyed its longest ever period of peace and prosperity. During Poxelis' reign, the only period of war was in fact the philosophical wars, of the conflict we call the War of the Magi. However, even though this war was brutal and many people died in it, in fact it only lasted a few months and had no effect on the political leadership of our kingdom. For the rest of his reign, Poxelis was faced by a number of threats. A large number of goblin invasions were warded off as ratmen began to live in the city's sewers. Battles were bloody, and this unjust war lasted a long time, but the kingdom's armies, led by Poxelis himself, massacred their enemies, and once more peace reigned over Arx. the exploration of the oceans began. Many strong boats put out to sea on the oceans to seek new lands and new treasures. But in 216, a meteor fell to the earth in our world. At first, nobody thought anything of this new phenomenon, but certain visionaries sensed that it was a very bad omen for the Arx's future. In fact, just years later, our sun began to die. Light became rarer and rarer, and the temperature plummeted to dangerous levels. Our then very youthful king, Lonshire, son of Poxelis, ordered that the whole city move to a nearby disused dwarf mine. It was an enormous amount of work, but all people knew that they were working for their own salvation, and not a soul complained. A peace treaty was signed with all the other races, except the Ratmen, with whom it's impossible to talk. However, their attacks became fewer at this time. All were busy saving Arx, saving their own lives. A treaty was signed giving a level of the mine to each race in exchange for the work done. This harmony lasted 5 years, during which time our sun perished. Everything was done to save Arx's inhabitants, but nevertheless, many lost their lives. In addition, nothing was heard from any of the other cities on the continent, and the logical conclusion was reached that they had done the same. It was not until much later that news arrived, borne by members of the Guild of Travellers. Other fortresses did still exist, spread across the continent, imprisoned in a thick shell of ice. The Guild of Travellers is now the only thing that allows communication and the occasional traffic of luxury products to flow between them. Apart from these sporadic contacts, Arx is totally self-sufficient. The Ancient Gods by Abdul al-Raif. In the beginning, the gods were omnipotent. They reigned over Arx for eons before humans made their first appearance. We know very little about the gods, apart from the fact that it seems they were full of wrath at the proliferation of humans and disappeared from the surface of the earth. Some very ancient writings suggest that this disappearance was caused by the lack of faith the first mortals showed in them. 2 gods stayed longer than all the others before disappearing. Their names were Zohark and Krahos. Zohark was the most powerful of all the gods. He was thunder, lightning, and earthquakes. He was storms, hurricanes, and everything that represented the brutal force of nature. But his power was only liberated by Krahos. Krahos was the goddess of equity, guardian of equilibrium and equality. They both needed each other, which could be why they stayed longer than the other gods, but finally they disappeared like the rest. Modern times saw ancient beliefs abandoned, and humans who could create magic themselves had their turn at controlling the earth and lightning. Humans entered into a new conceptual era where they had more belief in their own capabilities and only turned to the gods for marginal things such as fertility or hedonism. They revered the gods of negotiation, gold and luck, and even the gods of the poor. But these first gods, the gods of the brutal forces of creation, had no place in the pantheon. Since the start of this new era, and this shift of faith, the most powerful gods have retreated to their own dimension, called the Nodin, where they await new worshippers to enable them to return. The Kings of Arx by Grinonic Wormhill. Poxelis was our first king. He was the first to bring together the 5 human tribes living on our continent in the year 170. These tribes have been constantly in conflict with each other since the beginning, but not one of them was powerful enough to establish supremacy over the others. Poxelis was good and courageous, and he challenged and defeated the leader of each of the tribes in what came to be known as the Battle of the Shattered Shields. For before challenging the tribal leaders, Poxelis had ventured into an abandoned temple in the Wailing Mine Mountains. From this temple he brought back an enchanted shield, which allowed him to defeat all the leaders. As soon as he became the leader of all 5 tribes, Porxelis declared himself King of Arx. After this, he reigned over the new kingdom of Arx with wisdom, fairness, and generosity. He had a long and prosperous reign, despite skirmishes with goblins and ratmen, which, thanks to his military genius, he always managed to curb. He was less fortunate with his descendants. His first 2 sons, Elis and Nicus, both fine warriors, died during Porxelis' lifetime. Luckily, at the time of his death, in 212, his youngest son, Lonshire, was left to succeed him, but he was still too young. Lord Ponset acted as regent until the boy's coming of age, but he plotted to stop Lonshire from taking the throne. He was never very popular, and his little scheme failed, as Lonshire took the throne in 215 at the age of 16. King Lonshire faced a difficult task from the start, as the sun began its decline over our world. He was the instigator of the migration of the population underground. He did everything within his power to save as many people as the dwarf mines could take. He had the diplomatic intelligence to sign a treaty with all the other races in Arx, without which the move would have taken much longer and may even have been halted by the Ice Age, which was fast approaching. King Longshire honoured the memory of his father by transporting his coffin to a new crypt built on the foundation of the miner's tomb, so that people would never lose respect or forget this great king. Great Inventions of Arx by Edric Arrell. Human imagination has always given our society fantastic inventions. Everyone can remember the gigantic balloons kept aloft by hot air, which gave us such great capacity for exploration in the past. They also provided an excellent surveillance system against invasions, allowing us to keep watch over great distances. Another of the most fabulous inventions ever conceived was the submarine. This marvellous construction brought us a new means for fighting off pirates and goblin fleets. This gave us naval supremacy during the dark years of chaos and despair. Lord Marco, creator of this priceless invention, is one of the most celebrated heroes in the whole of Arx, but the greatest human invention is undoubtedly the underground kingdom of Arx. Perhaps it is not so much an invention as the conversion of an existing structure. Its origins are that of an old dwarf mine, with a particularly effective ventilation system. Already a splendid structure, it has become even more impressive thanks to the way humans have organized it. The old mine became a truly autonomous world, using all available space. Each known race was granted a level in accordance with the treaty signed in the year 217. This kingdom is a living demonstration of what human determination can achieve. The Races of Arx by Sebrafi Nin. Relations between the different races in Arx have always been difficult. The goblins were the most populous of all the races, due in part to their high fertility rates. However, as they were never able to organize themselves into a united kingdom, they gradually lost their predominant position. Fundamentally, goblins are not very intelligent. They have their own language, and they mostly speak a kind of pidgin version of human language. They are always looking for something to find fault with, constantly annoying the person they are talking to. They are liars, arrogant, cowardly, and are extremely lazy. The only time the goblins were the allies of humans was during the time of the Great Treaty. During this time, they helped build the underground kingdom, putting their natural aggression and bad manners aside for a while. However, after the work was complete and they had settled in, they slipped back into their old ways. It seems that trading gemstones is the only peaceful activity even the most tolerant of each race can bear. Trolls are a different kettle of fish. Even if it seems that their origins are similar to those of the goblins, they are completely different. They are very weak-willed and are creatures that seem to live in a slow motion. They are not aggressive and are much more often benevolent, but their monstrous strength and legendary stamina make them weighty allies and lethal adversaries. Both weighty allies and lethal adversaries. Their existence is made up of the simple things in life, such as finding something to eat or somewhere to sleep. Because they are mentally weak, they are quite easy to fool. But woe become anyone who does so if they find out, as their anger is legendary. The rat men have always preferred to have very little contact with other races. They communicate in signs rather than words, sometimes adding in cooing sounds. Rat men are extremely agile and thus formidable adversaries in combat. Some of them are the biggest killers in Arx. They are very subtle and extremely swift. They often use poisoned weapons. They lived underground in the city sewers when humans still lived above ground, feeding off waste products and excrement. Seems to suit them very well. Until now, the few run-ins we have had with the rat men have been brief but bloody. They made occasional forays into human cities to rifle through garbage bins, looking for food and rudimentary tools. Since they have been hidden underground in the fortress of Arx, they have slowly lost all contact with all the other races, and move around with exemplary discretion. Dwarves have a passion for anything mechanical, for craftsmanship, and for anything to do with engineering. They are also the best blacksmiths in the world. They have lived in the underground fortresses well before all other races took residence there also. They are the only ones who know how to build mines and exploit them properly, and they often sell the products they mine to humans. They have always had an appalling relationship with goblins, and waged numerous wars upon them, trying to eliminate them completely. One of their largest mines was chosen as a refuge, and the site of a new city of Arx. They also helped to build the basic infrastructures on site, and undertook many jobs there, apart from those on the goblin level. As they were already used to living in the depths, they moved further underground, and continued to exploit their mines. The origin of the Sisters of Eternium is a mystery. They look like hybrids between women and snakes. Their skin is covered in scales. There seem to be no males in their race, and we know nothing about how they reproduce. They are very gifted in the use of magic, making them the best magicians in Arx. According to certain legends, they were involved in the very origins of magic. They have always been very close to the human race, helping them at every difficult stage of their development. During their migration, the sisters promised to help the king of the humans and created underground plants to feed the inhabitants and their livestock. Very little is known about dragons. However, scholars have noticed that there are 4,815 scales on every specimen studied. Know Your Gods and Demons by the theologian Braconus. Alador, created on Omnis, benevolent god, seems to have retired after giving humans free rein over his dimension, and in particular the capacity to control their own destiny. He is assumed to have been very powerful, but he never put his full powers on display before leaving the dimension of Omnis. Sham, created on Omnis, evil god, the exact opposite of the previous god. Sham was very angry with Elador for the independence he gave to the humans. Seeing that he could not take this away from them, he undertook to try and get them under his control by reducing them to slavery. Akbar, created on Khult, evil god, named the god of destruction because he destroyed Khult completely. He was initially adored by his followers because of the help he gave them during the wars and conflicts. Turkio, created in Arx, benevolent god, despises the futility of the rich. It is advisable to get rid of all your gold pieces before doing any kind of business with him. Right, that's every book that you can read in this library at the moment. Done. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about some of the lore. I'm absolutely knackered, and I'm going to go to bed now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, click like. If you want to see more content, don't forget to subscribe, and all of that. Thank you very much. See you next time. Brill.